whole conversation around the hallmarks of aging. Our immune system actually trying to work to protect us, but because it turns from a hum to a dull roar to a massive flame as we get older, it's actually damaging good tissue and good cells, in addition to trying to remove us the toxins from our body, the infections, etc. And being able to keep that process under control is extremely important as we age. It becomes actually more and more relevant as we age. Right?
Yes, you're right. The baby aspirin it's associated with longer lifespan or health span. And one way it could potentially be doing that is because it's like a very slight anti-inflammatory dose to help to mute that.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on the Extend podcast. Thanks for flying out here and making this happen.
Oh, thank you, doctor. It's great. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so, ever since I've met you, I've been very curious about what you do and you as a human, because you've really done kind of what I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is do a crazy deep dive into the hallmarks of aging and kind of what are the different aspects that we can modify these hallmarks. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because you've done more of a deep dive than almost anyone I know. And it just seems like you have a really good handle on the hallmarks and kind of what affects them and in what direction. So I'm excited to have you.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Right. And so just so the audience kind of knows your background and why you did all this, would you mind just saying kind of where you came from and what drove you to this longevity space?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Long Island, New York, and I while in high school, I was on a school trip in New York City. And I suddenly got very dizzy and nauseous. And it turned out it was because I was about to have a seizure. And I woke up after that seizure with blood all over my shirt because I had severed my tongue. And they rushed me to the emergency room. And it turned out that I had a larger than golf ball sized brain tumor. It was on my left temporal lobe.
Wow.
And they had to do immediate surgery. So they rushed me to NYU Medical Center. And within just a few days, they resected the tumor. And it was a life-changing experience for me in every sense of the word, right? So my perspective on life and what I wanted to get out of my life changed. I went from playing on the high school football team to writing poetry in a journal because I couldn't have contact sport anymore. I had so many emotions that I had to sort through.
How old were you?
I was 16 years old.
So basically a kid.
Yes.
Going through this. That's so traumatic at that age.
It is. And it also made me aware of how delicate life really is. And so prior to that, I was already interested in health and nutrition and exercise. So starting from 12, my father helped me install a pull-up bar in my basement, and I did push-ups and pull-ups and started doing curls and stuff at a very young age. And I started to watch what I was eating as well. And so it came as that much more of a shock to me that I would suddenly be struck by a brain tumor when I was healthier, arguably, than almost all of my classmates. And so that's when my thinking about health really transformed. It went from this idea of health being the superficial side of health, which was playing sports well and looking good on the beach, to the real actual health, which is like the biology of our bodies, the cellular biology and organ health and so on, and essentially optimizing our biology to reduce the risk of disease and thereby also optimize ourselves here and now. So it's a future focus, but it has real world benefits today as well when you think in that longevity mindset.
Absolutely. And it's such a great point, because I think a lot of people in general, not just high school students, which I'm actually very passionate about speaking to high school students about health, because I think there's this misconception that people have that health, as long as you look outwardly healthy, that internally you're also healthy.
Right.
And, that's basically all we knew for maybe hundreds of years of human civilization. We didn't really know a lot about biological health. And it's kind of, obviously, if you're outwardly healthy, there's a very high chance that you don't have chronic disease going on. But there's also a chance that biologically you are aging faster and there might be something else going on under the hood. And so, at Next Health, we see a lot of athletes come through. And I can tell you that the athletic lifestyle, not only does it lead to things such as metabolic disease, because they're eating just as much as they can to gain muscle and they're eating the wrong foods, but also because of overtraining, you're seeing a lot of inflammation as well. And sometimes, like you unfortunately experience as well, you see people with incidental findings that actually are very consequential, right? And so it's always good to look under the hood further, even if you do live a healthy lifestyle, supposedly, right?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's something I wanted to mention myself, which is this idea of more is better, which is not actually the case. And it took me a long time to realize this. So I was sometimes going to the gym twice a day, like this is going into my 20s, and thinking that exercising more, running more, lifting more, and so on is always better. And it wasn't until I'm 40 now, so it wasn't until I was in my like mid 30s that I came to realize that I was just doing too much.
Right.
And I needed to prioritize recovery, rest and recovery. And that is equally as important as the actual activity and exercise and so on. So to your point, excess inflammation and the long-term effects of that, and we'll talk later about the mechanisms of aging, and inflammaging is one of them. So this chronic inflammation, we want to avoid that as much as possible. And overdoing it is not your friend in that case.
Yeah, that is so true. And you know, the more I attend conferences in longevity, I just went to a conference in New York with all the top longevity doctors in the country. This concept of homeostasis comes up a lot. You know, I think our body needs certain levels of stress because it makes our biology more resilient. However, when you push that too far, like to your point, overdoing it, your body just can't catch up. And so reaching that homeostasis is a key factor in all of our health routines, I think.
Exactly. So what you're talking about is this concept of hormesis, right?
Hormesis.
So you want to have a certain amount of stress that our bodies come back more resilient, right? So an example on the topic of physical stress is exercise.
Right.
So if you can only lift 5 pounds 10 times, and you do that today, and you do that for a few days, in the future, you might be able to lift 5 pounds 11 times or 6 pounds 10 times, right? So you become a little bit stronger because while you're exercising, you're actually tearing some muscle fibers, and the body comes back and says, I need to repair these muscle fibers, but I should make them a little bit stronger next time so that they don't get beat up so much. And that's great when you're doing the right amount of stress. And by the way, it's not only exercise, it's even certain types of foods we eat. So certain antioxidants, for example, aren't actually antioxidants in and of themselves. They're actually these mild toxins.
Right.
Oftentimes we find them in plant-based foods, and people will point to them on the internet and say, you don't want to take this because it has a toxin in it. Well, oftentimes that toxin is actually a healthy toxin because it induces hormesis, where our body comes back stronger, and then it produces its own internal antioxidants like glutathione and superoxide dismutase and so on. So that's the key, is to make sure that you get the right amount of stress and you come back stronger and more resilient, and you don't have too little stress. You don't want to be like a snowflake, and you don't want too much stress where you come back weaker and inflamed.
I'm so glad you mentioned this because it drives me nuts when I'm on Instagram and I see some wellness influencer like demonizing certain vegetables because they have these compounds in them, and like how these compounds are going to kill you. And the reality is we have evolved with these plants for millennia, and there's a reason that they're there. And there's a reason that our human biology is able to eat these plants and come out stronger later. And so even though these might be toxins that can protect the plant from their local environment, it doesn't mean that humans can't eat them and do better with these plants, right?
Exactly. And when you look at the scientific studies of people who do eat those plants, like take, for example, the Mediterranean diet.
Right.
So you have all of this controversy over which diet is best, and it's almost like religion, and it's tied into politics as well. But putting all of that aside for a second, when you look at the best diet from many, many different studies, it's time and time again, it's the Mediterranean diet, right? And that Mediterranean diet has beans in it, for example, right? A lot of people say you shouldn't eat beans. So it has beans, although they are sprouted. So that is one step you can take.
Right.
They have lots of vegetables, and they have a moderate amount of protein and very low animal protein, a moderate amount of like fish, seafood, and so on. And when we look at that, we see that is what's important is to see that leads to the healthiest outcomes. So you can look at it under a microscope and look at it in a mechanistic way and say, theoretically, these are toxins that are going to be bad for us. But oftentimes, they actually end up being good for us. And a very quick example of that is we always think of free radicals as being bad for us, right? But when you exercise, your body produces free radicals. And if you take vitamin C or vitamin E, these healthy antioxidants, after a workout, you're going to counteract a lot of these free radicals. And the result of it in studies is that you're going to get less of the benefits from exercise if you have these antioxidants after a workout, because you're counteracting those free radicals. In this case, this specific case, the free radicals are signals to our bodies to come back stronger, the whole process of hormesis, right? So it's information that's being transmitted to our bodies in the form of the free radicals. So to throw it completely out and say you don't want any free radicals, it's more nuanced than that, as most things in life tend to be.
Exactly. And another signal that points to the exact same conclusion that you came to there is with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, for example. If you go into hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a lot of the benefit comes from the free radicals that are formed after being in the chamber for a while. And if you take glutathione afterwards, you've basically negated the effect of getting in the chamber. So it's very nuanced, and there's different protocols in hyperbaric oxygen for different things that you're trying to go after. However, they are important. Now, we have glutathione and we have other free radical scavengers for a reason, and that's because sometimes we do get too much oxidative stress. And in those moments, it might be a good idea to take some of these, right? When do you think is a good idea to take things like vitamin C or glutathione or some of these other free radical oxidative stress kind of scavengers?
Yeah, I think, so we need vitamin C, obviously, otherwise we'll have scurvy, right? So we need a certain amount of the vitamin C. I do have some vitamin C in a multivitamin that I take, but I intentionally take that multivitamin away from my workouts. So I work out in the morning and I'll have the multivitamin in the evening. So as long as there's enough hours separating it, you're still sending those signals to your body. Now, I don't know to what degree my athletic performance or my muscle growth might be slightly better if I timed it a little bit differently, but there's enough hours where I'm not going to deal with the details like that, right? If I was an Olympic athlete, maybe a different story, but I'm far from that. So
it makes total sense. What about taking your multivitamin first thing in the morning before you work out? Is there still an effect that could potentially affect your gains afterwards?
Yeah. So there's still like the half-life of the vitamin C. And also when it comes to vitamin E, believe it or not, studies have found, typically rodent studies, but have actually found that high levels of vitamin E can actually shorten lifespan, which is counterintuitive. And we don't know exactly why, but most likely it's because of the forms of vitamin E. So what you really want is like the mixed tocopherols and tocotrienols. You don't want a very simple form of vitamin E that you find in a typical cheap multivitamin, right? But back to your question, I would say I personally would try to space it out even more, because you have to look at the half-life of these molecules in your blood. And that's going to give you the answer as to how much is still in your blood while you're exercising and post-workout. And you can quickly and easily look that up on, I don't know it off the top of my head for vitamin C. It's probably different for the different forms of vitamin C, because you have ascorbic acid, which is commonly found in fruits, but then you've got fat-soluble forms and so on. So it's a little bit more technical, but I would personally just try to space it out even more.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to turn the conversation now to the reason we have you on the show is to really focus in on anti-aging and longevity and the entire concept of that. But before I do that, I want to frame this conversation in that when we're talking about longevity and anti-aging, really, it gets a bad rap sometimes because it's like people assume that we're talking about trying to live to 250 years old. But reality is that what we're really trying to do is increase our health span, the amount of years that we spend feeling vibrant and feeling energetic and having the ability to move and think the way we want to. And through that, the side effect might be that we add more years to our life, which is great. I don't think there is a real magic bullet yet to add, decades and decades to our lifespan. And I want to get your opinion on that entire area of research. But just to frame the conversation a little bit, would you mind talking a little bit about the goals of some of the anti-aging and longevity work being done out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it really depends on who you ask. So if you go to a longevity scientist who's really deep in the field, they will say longevity, and the most important thing to study is the maximum species lifespan. So that's literally about lifespan and less so about health span. They'll look at health span in the study, but that's a secondary endpoint.
Sure.
The primary endpoint is lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
And so in humans, that is, I believe, 124 years.
Right.
Excuse me, 124 years.
That's
It's
the last thing I read.
Jean Calment from France.
Right.
And so the goal for these researchers and a lot of biotechs in the field is to extend lifespan even beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask someone who's more pragmatically minded, like I am and like my company happens to be, we focus more on extending health span, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
And then we expect that by doing so, we're also extending lifespan as well. And I think that that's most important to the vast majority of us. Who wants to live to 150 years if they are, in a wheelchair,
frail
exactly,
Right.
exactly. And they're not cognitively sharp and so on, right? So we want to feel like the youngest version of ourselves at any given point in time. That's why at my company we say be younger for longer.
Yes.
That is our foundational goal. And but that's both, right? So being younger and for longer implies both the health span and the lifespan. So
Right.
In an ideal world, we are addressing both.
Well said. And I think this space has advanced incredibly rapidly in the last 2 decades. First starting with the identification at a cellular level of what's causing aging. I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn at TED conference one year when she had first won the Nobel Prize or first written her book, I can't remember which one, about telomere shortening. And that kind of set off this wave of research at a cellular level of why do people age? And we were talking a little bit earlier about the hallmarks of aging. Would you mind diving into what are the hallmarks of aging just globally? Like what is that concept and how has that kind of evolved over the last 2 decades and where we are now?
Sure. So there was a scientific paper that came out just over 10 years ago. And this was an epiphany moment for me when I came across the study. So after my brain tumor, I was very interested in doing everything I could to try to avoid getting another one or any chronic condition for that matter. And so I was constantly on PubMed trying to get the questions answered, all of these questions I had about health answered directly from the scientific papers rather than through secondary sources. And I stumbled upon this paper called The Hallmarks of Aging. It was published in a prestigious journal known as Cell. And now it's looked at as a seminal piece in the longevity field. And it essentially broke down the biological reasons why we get older. So it's deconstructing the aging process and looking at everything on a cellular or molecular level that's happening within our bodies. And so at the time, there were 9 that were identified. Just last year, those original scientists, those authors, actually republished and added 3 more. So now there are 12 known mechanisms of aging. There will likely be additional added in the years to come. But we have a pretty firm understanding at this point as to why we are getting older. And then the question turns to, all right, if aging is the number one risk factor for disease, which it is, that includes cancer, heart disease, dementia, and glaucoma, and you go down the list of all of these different diseases. If aging is the number one risk factor and we're understanding the component parts of the aging process, what can we do to actually slow down the process?
Right.
And the most logical thing is to try to improve these mechanisms, slow down their degradation. And so to that point, we can talk about the mechanisms, specifically some of those mechanisms.
Yes, please. But before we do that, I just want to kind of clarify a thought that I have in my mind about aging as related to chronic disease. So I think I grew up thinking chronic disease is what leads to aging. We start getting Alzheimer's, we start losing cognitive function, and then that leads to Alzheimer's, which then causes aging. And then we potentially, get cholesterol buildup in our arteries, and that causes heart attacks, which is a symptom of aging.
Yep.
But it's really the opposite kind of thought that I've kind of come to in the last few years, where aging is what is causing us to undergo neurodegeneration, cardiovascular effects, et cetera. And I think that's an important fact, because if we are to look at aging scientifically, and we are to address aging from a cellular level, we can potentially avoid chronic disease as well.
Yes, 100%. And most people, I think, when they think of aging, they think of this as just something that's part of life. Like aging is inevitable, right? Maybe they think that it's just the entropy of life. Over time, things get more chaotic. And so even inside of our bodies, and therefore eventually things just fall apart and you die. And although there is some truth to that idea of entropy, when we actually break it down into its component parts, we realize that it's actually a lot more to it than that. In fact, if we go back to the 80s, I believe, there was the free radical theory of aging.
Right.
And this was the theory of free radicals, these oxidative stressors actually causing damage in our bodies. And then eventually there's so much damage, our body can't keep up with it, and we just die or get disease first and then die. And researchers have since realized that it's actually much more complex than that. So yes, there is DNA damage that takes place from free radicals and oxidative stress and so on. And that is one of the mechanisms of aging, but it's only one of the 12 mechanisms of aging. So as usual, it's more complex than we first thought it was, but we are getting closer and closer with each day into understanding it, and then also being able to reverse aspects of it. And even on an organ level, and we can talk about some of the experiments in epigenetic reprogramming where we're able to actually make an old organ young again. So this is more in the future side of longevity. It's not practically available for humans right now, but it's something that can come in the years ahead.
Wow. Yeah, it's exciting research that's happening. And let's do that. Let's go ahead and dive into a few of the hallmarks of aging. And I know they're kind of split up into different categories as well, right? So maybe you can kind of take us through some of the hallmarks.
Sure. Happy to. So I'll talk about a few that people are probably most familiar with. At least they're keywords that they've heard before. So mitochondrial dysfunction, for example. And this is one that is a favorite among the wellness community, always talking about, optimizing your mitochondria, right? So what are mitochondria? They are essentially the power plants within our cells. They take the fat and the carbohydrates that we eat and then convert it into energy currency being ATP, right? Through a process known as the Krebs cycle, which we might talk about again later. And as we age, we have fewer mitochondria, and those mitochondria are not as effective at generating energy anymore. And the result is, it's not simply energy. We typically think of energy as like the ability to exercise or think, and that is like the downstream effect of it. But cells have all different functions within our bodies. Some of them are immune cells, some are detoxification, and so on. So when you have less energy, you're going to do your job a little bit less well. And that happens from mitochondrial dysfunction. So the question for longevity is, how can we optimize these mitochondria? How can we have more of them? And how can we make them more resilient and producing more energy output? Things like exercise are the most obvious ways to do it. But there are also different molecules that can be found in supplements, for example, that can have a hormetic stress on the mitochondria and then lead to more resilient and plentiful mitochondria.
Yeah. Just to double click on mitochondria for a little bit, what I find incredibly interesting about mitochondria is they were actually separate organisms from unicellular organisms. And these organisms teamed up synergistically to form life, basically. And so mitochondria actually has its own DNA that create more mitochondria within the cell. And so it's just really interesting to me that we have to look at them as a little bit separate, and they have their own biology that we can affect.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. And another interesting fact about it is that all of your mitochondria comes from your mother. So you don't get your mitochondria from your father. So you can either thank your mother or blame her, depending on where you stand with your energy production. So
is the reason for that is because when the ovum and the sperm come together, the ovum is the one that has all the mitochondria already in it. So those are the ones that are replicating in the fetus?
I turned that question back to you, Doc. I actually don't know the answer to that.
I seem to remember that from medical school somewhere, but I'll have to fact check myself on that one. All right, so we know mitochondria is super important. And sometimes in my brain, I try to rank these hallmarks of aging. But what I find is every time I try to do that, they all kind of fall into almost equally important. So I don't know how you think of them, but what is your next kind of one that you're focused on more than?
So you raise a good point, which is that this is a complex web where each
Right.
of them impact each other, right?
Exactly.
And so
right.
looking at them in isolation, although if you improve one, you will probably have reverberating effects across all of the others. In the ideal scenario, you're actually impacting all of them. And that was the insight I had when I first started my company was how can we impact all of the mechanisms of aging?
Interesting.
Now, I was focusing first on not necessarily the most important, but on the most commonly known, right? So mitochondria or stem cells are commonly known, right? A lot of people are getting injections of stem cells. But in terms of the most impactful, one of the more impactful ones is the epigenome. So the epigenome is actually, a simple way to think of it is which genes are turned on and off. So we're all born with our genes and they are permanent. They don't change. There is CRISPR technology, which might change that for certain people in the future. But for the sake of discussion, it's permanent. It doesn't change. Then we have our epigenome. So if you think of your genes as being like the piano keys, you're not changing your piano keys. They exist. But the music you play on your piano can be very different, right? So imagine when you're first born, you're playing a beautiful song. Let's just say it's Vivaldi Four Seasons, right? It sounds wonderful. But as you age, you hit the wrong key or you press it too hard or too soft or you miss a key. And so that song doesn't sound as good anymore. And that's essentially what's happening with our genes as we get older. So epigenetically, different genes turn on that shouldn't, and different genes turn off that shouldn't, or it's actually more like a dimmer switch. So some might be more dimmed than others, and it's not as optimal. So there's a number of things that come out of the epigenome. One is biological age clocks, which we can talk about, but you can actually measure it by looking at your epigenome, measure your biological age, that is, by looking at your epigenome. But it also impacts the health of the cells and by extension, the organ that is the epigenetic expression or the current status of it, right? And so there are researchers, there's actually a Nobel laureate named Yamanaka who discovered these 3 enzymes. So they're essentially proteins that are able to coerce an old cell to get back to its stem cell state again, which is stem cells. I mentioned it earlier, but very quickly, stem cells are essentially the cells that can then replicate and create copies of your cells. So you need your stem cells to create new, healthy, resilient cells because our cells are constantly getting damaged and dying and so on. So bringing it back to basically a fetal state with these Yamanaka factors, which was an amazing
Massive discovery. Yeah. One of the most game-changing discoveries ever in human history, to be able to take a cell, any cell from your body, and turn it back to a pluripotential stem cell is just mind-blowing.
Exactly. And then, so the work that followed, so Professor Ocampo, who I met with in Lausanne, Switzerland to see his lab and talk to him about his research, he ran a study where he used these Yamanaka factors in aged mice and was able to make their livers young again. So imagine having an old mouse that has a cirrhotic liver, and they're able to then essentially make it the same equivalent of these young mice. And so then that started a lot of enthusiasm around this idea of Yamanaka factors and the epigenome and the possibility, essentially the information theory of aging that Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard has really popularized, that it's actually an information loss issue of the epigenome, almost like a scratched CD is how Dr. Sinclair talks about it, to polish that CD off and then actually make it function properly again. The music plays, back to my analogy, plays properly again, right? And so I know Dr. Sinclair is doing research on eye health and aged eyes and trying to cure age-related blindness.
Right.
And so there's a lot of potential behind the epigenome. Now, what I would caution is for people to think that, okay, now we're going to be able to make everyone young again, and because our bodies are much more complex than that. And being able to make one single organ younger again doesn't mean it's going to be easy or even attainable for us to make everything across our bodies young enough again to make people live much, much longer lives. Right. But on a specific organ level, there's more potential in the midterm, I'd say.
That's great to hear, because I had a conversation with Dr. Peter Attia about this, because he's very practical about, what's out in the news in science and what can actually be applied.
Yes.
And he had a very important point, which is Yamanaka factors are an incredible discovery, but to be able to apply Yamanaka factors to your entire body and expect it to reverse age is kind of science fiction, right? You can't just give someone IV Yamanaka factors and somehow they go to every cell and they just stop yourself from reverse aging at exactly the right moment.
Right.
There's no Benjamin Button kind of science going on here that's going to work. So it takes scientists like Ocampo to really look into organ-specific aging and how can we target organs and reverse specific cells in reverse when we need them to be. And so my question to you is, how is he applying those cells to the livers of these mice, and how is he controlling that reverse aging process? Do you have any insight into that?
I believe that they were injected
Directly to the liver.
Directly into the liver. And also what's important is to decide which of the Yamanaka factors. So there are 3, but there are only 2 that are needed to be used. And what was found is that if you used all 3, it might bring the cell back to too young of a state. And a concern becomes that either they lose their identity, they have an identity crisis, right? Or actually the cells can actually become cancerous and turn into tumors. So it's not this very simple approach of taking Yamanaka factors, to your point, like drinking it or injecting it and suddenly get an IV infusion and suddenly become young again. It's a lot more complicated than that. And looking at it on an organ-specific basis, even the specific Yamanaka factors, the ratios of them, maybe there are other enzymes that can have another additive effect or modulating effect so that it doesn't go over the top. So there's still a lot to learn there. So I don't want people, like you said, the headlines say one thing and they want to sensationalize things. We're a while away from it being practically relevant for most of us, but it's also still something to be very excited about and hopeful for the future.
Yeah, I think the excitement for me comes from the true understanding that these things can do these, at least even in vitro. And we have the ability now to research on pluripotential stem cells, whereas prior it was very difficult to get these stem cells to even do research on.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're reminding me when I was in college, I was planning to start a business to bank stem cells from, at the time, it was just discovered by an NIH scientist, Dr. Song-Tao Shi, I remember acutely, in deciduous incisors, which are teeth. So it's the technical term for teeth. And formerly, or prior to that, companies were banking it from umbilical cord blood. And this was much more convenient. And so I was planning to launch this business to basically bank baby teeth, only to then hear about the discovery of the ability to coerce cells to become pluripotent again. I was like, this business is going to be, outdated in no time. And that was just my, being a naive college student and not realizing how long it takes for this to roll out. And now there are plenty of businesses that are banking the baby teeth.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny. We touched on methylation as one of the hallmarks of aging, and I know we're going to come back to that when we have a discussion around biological age clocks. But I would like to go through some more of the hallmarks.
Sure.
You mentioned stem cells, and stem cell exhaustion is one of the hallmarks. And are there ways that you've seen to counteract stem cell exhaustion?
Yeah. So just to clarify, when you say methylation, that's specifically the epigenetic approach, right?
Yes, exactly.
So the methylation is like the process that takes place for the epigenome, just in case a listener didn't catch that. Stem cells, yes. So as I mentioned, stem cells are important because they are making replicas of our cells. And we can only make so many replicas. So there's something known as the Hayflick limit. And once you make a certain number of copies, which is a very large number of copies, but once you make a certain number, the stem cell is dying off or it's not actually able to make perfect copies anymore. And when you start to have a cell that's not functioning properly, you're going to have either a higher risk of that cell turning senescent or it having flaws in its DNA and then turning cancerous and so on. So I would say when it comes to stem cells, a couple of things to consider. One is the more damage you have to your cells, the more you need to replace your cells, the more you then need to have, use your stem cells, which you might exhaust, right? So living a healthier life and avoiding toxins and smoking and so on is going to, on its own, have a favorable effect on your stem cells. It will also simultaneously have a favorable effect on what you mentioned earlier, telomeres. So telomere shortening is another mechanism of aging. So your telomeres are the end caps of your chromosomes. Your chromosomes contain your DNA. And so if you think of an analogy would be the ends of your shoelaces. So your shoelaces have all of these little threads in it, and the caps on your shoelace are what keep everything together, essentially. And when as we all know, you step on the caps of your shoelace and then eventually comes undone, and then all of the threads come out. So imagine that being your DNA being exposed. That's a problem. And so studies have found that although telomere shortening is associated with aging, it's not directly correlated. I mean, there's a correlation, but it's not strong enough of a correlation. So in other words, by looking at my telomere length and your telomere length, we can't conclude how old we are biologically or even chronologically just by looking at that. But what we can see from telomere length is your disease risk. And so, for example, you can reach something known as the telomeric brink. And that is when your telomeres get too short to the point that you have a higher risk of disease. Say gastrointestinal cancers, for example, are correlated with shortened telomeres. You also have a higher risk of death once it gets to that point. So for telomeres, it's one of those things that we actually offer a test at my company that looks at both biological age on the epigenetic level, but also telomere length. What we tell our customers is it's a check off the box metric. It's about making sure you're not in the lower percentiles for your age cohort. So if in my case, being 40 years old, I want to make sure that compared to other 40-year-olds, I'm in, ideally above the 50th percentile, which I am, fortunately. But if you're in like the 20th or the 10th percentile, that's when you should start to get concerned. There's something happening there that you need to keep an eye on, because although you're still young at 40, you're in the lower end of the range, and you need to do something to try to either lengthen the telomeres or slow down their degradation.
Right, exactly. And that brings up the next topic, which is another hallmark, which is senescence and cellular senescence. So would you define that for us and just kind of give us your take on that topic?
Sure. So senescent cells are becoming more popular. You're seeing, influencers on the web talk about senescent cells, and they'll oftentimes call them zombie cells. Yeah. The reason they call them zombie cells is because these cells are not really alive, performing their function. Right. They're actually in this semi-dead state, but not completely dead, to the point that they're actually secreting a inflammatory molecule. Senescent associated secretory phenotype is what it's known as, or SASP, an SASP. And so this is actually, the SASP is actually causing damage to nearby cells and increasing inflammation, increasing the risk that they turn senescent, and so on. And that's part of the reason why senescent cells, as we age, they go up exponentially. All of these mechanisms actually increase exponentially. But part of the reason is the SASP is impacting nearby cells and thereby turning them into senescent cells. Senescent cells are one of the reasons why our skin wrinkles as we age, one of the reasons why our arteries stiffen, along with glycation, for example. And so we want to do what we can to either prevent senescent cells first and foremost, or reduce their spread, essentially preventing, or in some cases try to destroy those senescent cells. But we need to exercise caution, because there's actually some recent research that finds that there might be some beneficial protective effects of the senescent cells, and the verdict is still out. We don't know for sure exactly in what cases they're providing a benefit versus not. Now, overall, I will say that senescent cells, you want to eliminate them for the most part, but we don't fully know. Now, one of the things that senescent cells does that's protective, actually, is it can take our bodies can take a cancerous cell and turn it senescent. Now, ideally, the immune system is identifying a cancerous cell and just destroying that cell and using autophagy to basically digest it and then recycle its parts. But sometimes it flies under the radar, and for one reason or another, it turns senescent. So there's a reason why it exists. Even when women give birth, there's a large number of senescent cells that form from the birthing process. So when you scab your knee, there's senescent cells that accumulate around there. So there is some sort of purpose. But then the question is, For how long do you need them? And do we want to eventually get rid of them because of the damaging effects that they can have?
Yeah. And it's, it's really tied into this whole concept of hormesis again, where, I think doing certain activities like long-term fasting can also help you clear senescent cells, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right. And to that point, scientists are also working on creating substances known as senolytics.
Right.
So seno for senescence and lytic for lysis, like cutting or removing, destroying the senescent cells. There's a very popular cocktail that some biohackers follow, which I would personally never touch, but it's a combination of dasatinib, which is a mild chemotherapeutic, plus the natural molecule quercetin.
Right.
And they will take it, once every 6 months or so, because for senescent cells, generally speaking, for senolytic, you want to just do one high dose and then give it to destroy senescent cells and then stop, because you don't want to damage healthy cells, right? But I would be concerned about the possibility of this damaging healthy cells in the process.
Sure.
A very quick fact about one of the products we sell is that we did a mouse study, which if we have time, we can talk more about later, but we actually outperformed lifespan extension of the dasatinib quercetin combination. So this is something that has been already shown to extend lifespan in mice, and it's considered one of the most high-tech things. And our natural formulation that you can take over the counter has actually outperformed that.
Oh, interesting. I'd love to dive into more of those compounds here in a bit, but I want to just finish up the whole conversation around the hallmarks of aging. We haven't touched on nutrient sensing pathways yet, and I'd love to hear your take on, well, first an explanation, because you're so eloquent about explaining these hallmarks. I want to hear how you explain nutrient sensing pathways and the degradation of those over time, and how does that happen, and how can we use lifestyle interventions to potentially help turn that process around?
Sure. So, so what you're talking about are some common terms that people may have heard of, popularized by people like, for example, Dr. Peter Attia, who you mentioned earlier, is mTOR, for example, or AMP kinase, right? So let's start. We'll stick with those two to keep it simple. So mTOR is a growth pathway. So when you consume proteins, for example, and to some degree carbohydrates as well, you are stimulating the mTOR pathway, which is that of growth. So we want to create new cells, essentially. And that sounds great at first, but we actually don't want to always be creating new cells. Right. And when we live in modern society where we are in a constantly fed state, we never have, periods of famine. And whereas historically we did,
right,
and all animals go periods where they're not eating, right? We don't really have that anymore. So mTOR is always engaged. And I mentioned earlier, like, for example, with stem cells and telomeres, if you're always replicating cells, that can actually have a negative effect.
Right.
So one of the reasons why fasting is actually good for you, also the prescription drug that's popular, rapamycin, which has a lot of scientific research around its ability to extend lifespan across many animal species. Everyone that has been studied in actually has extended lifespan, is because it mutes or down regulates the mTOR pathway.
Sure.
And so that is something that's correlated with longer lifespans, right, is reducing the mTOR. Now, AMP kinase, on the other hand, is a pathway that's associated with nutrient starvation.
Yes.
So when you exercise, for example, your muscle cells, they need more nutrients. And so they will exhibit AMP kinase, or they will stimulate that pathway. When you fast, you're actually reducing your levels of, reducing your levels of nutrients, but then your AMP kinase is stimulated.
Right.
And this is also associated with longer lifespans and better health spans. So that's the combination of these two are a good reason why fasting, for example, is going to have favorable effects on your health. You're reducing the mTOR and you're increasing the AMP kinase, both of which are associated with better health. Right. Now, you asked why is our body's ability to sense these degraded over time? And there are multiple reasons for it, but a couple are, for example, and now this is getting into two more mechanisms of aging.
Yes.
One is intercellular communication. So our cells are all communicating with each other. And as we age, they're not able to communicate with each other quite as well as they were before. And as a result, the signals that should be sent across the cells of whether mTOR or AMP kinase are kind of muted. They are not able to communicate through this vast network of cells that we have in our bodies, right? There's a lot of intelligence within our bodies, crazy amount of intelligence in our bodies that we don't fully even comprehend.
Right.
And so that's that intracellular communication. Then there's also something known as loss of proteostasis.
Right.
And proteostasis is, so in the word proteo is proteins. Proteins, they're these chains of amino acids, and they need to fold in a certain way. And that shape then gives it the ability to essentially signal to different cells throughout our bodies how to behave, how to act. And as we age, we're not able to fold those proteins quite as well anymore. And the result is these proteins aren't stimulating when they should, and that's part of that communication issue. And then they're also sometimes getting stuck like outside of the cell or inside of the cell, and they're accumulating. So those are the first that come to mind in terms of the possible explanations for the nutrient sensing pathways.
Yeah. And that's a really good review of the original mechanisms of aging.
Yes.
And now, 10 years later, they came out with another paper adding 3 more to the list. And I'd love for you to just kind of run me through those real quick.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So we talked earlier about inflammaging, right? I mentioned it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So inflammation is this process that is actually happening within our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're young, it's pretty much absent. But as we get older, it's like a quiet whisper that turns into a hum that eventually, as we're very old, it's this like loud, obnoxious noise of this inflammation within our bodies. And that inflammation is causing damage. And so we want to do everything that we can to try to reduce that inflammation.
Right.
So that's the first new hallmark.
Yeah. And what's important about that is I think that's our immune system actually trying to work to protect us. But because it turns from a hum to a dull roar to a massive flame as we get older, it's actually damaging good tissue and good cells, in addition to trying to remove the toxins from our body, the infections, et cetera. And being able to keep that process under control is extremely important as we age. It becomes actually more and more relevant as we age.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, you're right. The baby aspirin is one of the, it's associated with longer lifespan or health span. And one way it could potentially be doing that is because it's like a very slight anti-inflammatory dose to help to mute that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so inflammation is one of them. And what are the other 2 that they've recently identified?
Sure. So the next is disabled macroautophagy, or a reduction in autophagy.
Mm-hmm.
So autophagy is a process, again, largely based on the immune system, that is essentially looking for cells that are old and not performing their function well, and basically digesting them and recycling their parts. And so this is important in case, for example, we mentioned earlier, there's a cancerous cell or the cell is not performing its job well. So the body needs to recycle that. Autophagy goes up significantly when you fast or you calorically restrict. You have more autophagy that takes place. And so that's like a cellular cleanup process, which is very important for us. But as we get older, our immune systems aren't as strong as they were. They're not as good at identifying the cells or even the threats on an immune system level, and removing them. And so that's something that happens as we get older, reduction in the autophagy.
Got it. And autophagy, I mean, you hear about autophagy a lot with biohackers trying to stimulate autophagy, and there's different molecules that can do that as well. And there are different things you can do just in your wellness routine to stimulate autophagy. And once we get through the last of these hallmarks of aging, I'd really love to talk to you about what are things that people can do to affect all of these hallmarks. So what's the last one? And then we'll touch on the things that we can do.
Yeah, sure. So the last one is microbiome dysbiosis.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So our microbiomes, everyone is hearing about our microbiomes over the past, say, 10 years or so. It's become more and more popular. It's actually a field that is pretty new, so it's far more complicated than people maybe initially thought. And so there's a lot more research we need to do to fully understand our microbiomes. It's like an entire universe in our guts. And so it's incredibly complex. But as we age, our microbiomes, they become less diverse. So we have fewer bacterial species. And the species that we do have are not as ideal. Some of them are, for example, associated with inflammation. There are certain species that are associated with longer health spans and lifespans. So, for example, centenarians have higher levels of Akkermansia probiotic species, but it's something that's relatively new. But a lot of things actually happen from our guts. We have 7 gut organ axes, right? So we have our gut brain axis, our gut heart axis, our gut liver, gut skin, and so on. And so the things happening in our gut can affect many different organs and how we feel and how we function and so on. So it's an area of like great excitement for researchers to be better understanding to what degree this universe of species within us are actually impacting the full body, the full organism.
Absolutely. I mean, the gut, relatively until recently, it's been kind of hidden inside of us, both, metaphorically and in science. And now this incredible burst of research around the microbiome has just been so illuminating to doctors, especially as to how much the gut really impacts our brain, our heart, all the different 7 gut axes that you mentioned. It's just so exciting because now we can truly affect other organ systems through modifications in our gut microbiome, which is massive, right? Because and what's really massive about that is it's different. What's really massive about that is that the therapeutics that can be developed through gut microbiome manipulation can be safer and much more effective than actual pharmaceuticals.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. There's a tremendous amount of potential behind it. It's just we're at the beginning. We're at the early stages of it. Of course, there's things like fecal microbiota transplants, and people see improvements in many different issues, whether it be IBS or body fat reduction and so on. But we're just getting started, really.
Yeah, it's really incredible to see kind of the science kind of blossom in this. But to your point, we are at the very beginnings of this. And so, whenever there's new science out, everyone jumps on the bandwagon and tries to sell you every probiotic and, diet that they can, really without much knowledge of what's really going on in the microbiome, because we just don't have the knowledge right now. There's so much more that needs to be done. So people need to be careful.
Exactly. Yeah. So, for example, taking probiotics, it doesn't really change your microbiome, right? So acutely, like for the day that you took it, it might have a small effect, but even then, it's so few CFUs, the colony forming units, right? Like the amount is so small that it has a relatively, it's like a drop in the bucket. And so that's not to say all probiotics in all instances. There are cases where, they can be helpful for people, but there's still a lot to be learned about how we can actually have those probiotic strains live and flourish within our guts, and for the specific outcomes that we're looking at, whether that be cognitive or skin health and so on and so forth.
Right. And what I really love about going through these hallmarks with you is it really frames the discussion, and it serves as a framework really for the overall discussion of aging. And if I were ever to teach a high school biology course, which is actually a dream of mine, is to add a chapter in a high school biology book on health and wellness, I would use this hallmarks of aging structure to frame the entire discussion around the molecules and the lifestyle interventions that you can do to truly affect your health. And so when you go through this list, in your mind, how do you think about how people can affect all of these factors through lifestyle interventions? What are the big things that people can do to really modify all of these at the same time?
Yeah, great question. So it's predominantly our lifestyles, right? So we mentioned earlier the idea of our genes and then our epigenome and so on, right? Most people, when they think of aging and health, they think their genes are responsible for their health outcomes. But researchers have found that it's really only 10 to 20% your genes, and it's actually predominantly your lifestyle and your environment in terms of the air you breathe and the things your eyes see and so on. And so I think that for those of us who are proactive, that's very empowering because we realize we can take our health into our own hands, and our health span and our lifespan are things that we can directly impact here and now. And we can literally slow down our rate of aging. It's scientifically shown that we can accelerate our aging or decelerate our aging. And it comes down to our lifestyles, the foods we eat, the perhaps supplements we take, even prescriptions, and so on.
Right.
So the categories I would say really come down to nutrition. And when I say nutrition, it's not only what you eat, it's how much you eat, when you eat it, and when you're not eating, right? So meal timing and fasting and all of these things play a role.
Exactly.
Next is activity. We already talked about, for most Americans and most people in general, it's about doing more activity. But for some people, as we said, it's about doing less activity.
Right.
Next, I would say is recovery. And in that category, I would include sleep, which is oftentimes neglected. It's becoming more and more popular for people to focus on sleep. But I remember when I graduated college, like people said, like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And, people were with like a badge of honor that they did an all-nighter and they worked until 6 a.m. and then they started again at 9 a.m., right? So
in reality, you just took a week off your life, probably.
Exactly.
You should have worked half the day and lived longer, right?
Right. Exactly. Yep. And so at this point, it's encouraging to see the emphasis that's being put on sleep because it's incredibly important. Another category would be psychology, and I would put very close to that psychology is relationships. So when it comes to psychology, having a positive outlook, having purpose in your life, relationships, having strong relationships, being social, having people that you can count on, that you can talk to about anything on your mind, or non-toxic in your life, and so on. And then supplementation, I would simplify and say you've got really 3 categories of supplements. You've got general health supplements. This is really just to maintain the bare necessities for you to be healthy, right? So this is what the government has the RDAs for. It's the vitamins and minerals that you find in multivitamins and so on.
Things that are essential for our survival and our cellular health fall into this category.
Exactly. Vitamin A, the B family, C, D, E, K.
Like if you don't get them, you'll get into a disease state. Like you don't have enough vitamin C, you get scurvy, et cetera.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And there are ideal levels that are oftentimes actually higher than what the government recommends. The recommendations by the government are what you need to avoid scurvy in the short term, right? But it's not about optimizing your biology for the long term. And those levels are typically higher. There was an analysis done of the N. Haynes data set that looked at the longest lived people in different cohorts and then like how much of each of the nutrients they were taking in. And essentially what I gathered from that study was that almost 100% of Americans are getting an inadequacy of at least one critical nutrient. That might be vitamin D, it might be vitamin K, it might be magnesium, it might be choline, the forgotten B vitamin as it's called, right? Which you can find in egg yolks. At least one of them, and most oftentimes it's more than one. So there is something to be said about that. Second category would be a goal-specific outcome, right? So these supplements might focus on, for example, athletic performance or post-workout. It might be for libido enhancement or nootropics for cognitive function and so on. So goal-specific. And then the third category, which is technically within that second category, but for the sake of this discussion, we'll separate it. It's the longevity-specific supplements. So just because something is good for you in the short term for a specific outcome, like focusing better or feeling more energy or performing better in your, running or weightlifting, does not mean it's actually good for you in the long term. And this is something it took me a while to actually come to the realization of. But some things are good for you in the short term, but bad for you in the long term. And so we take the perspective of looking at things that are found to be good for you in the long term, associated with longer health spans and lifespans, but then also ideally are providing short-term health benefits as well. So this is the ultimate form of first do no harm, right? Looking at the long-term effects of the supplements.
What's an example of something that's good for you in the short term, but bad for you in the long term?
Good question. Well, since you're a doctor, why don't we take like an actual prescription drug, right? So take something like Nexium.
I was going to mention that one. That's so funny that's the one that you brought up, but perfect example.
Okay, great. So I'd love for you to chime in with your doctor perspective on it. But the short term benefits are for gastrointestinal issues, but the long term, you are reducing the absorption of many different nutrients. It can increase the risk of cancer and so on. But you can speak better to the topic than I can.
I would say, Nexium is a acid reducer for symptomatic relief of having gastroesophageal reflux disease, which is the way Western medicine thinks of pharmaceuticals is it's almost like a subscription program, right? That you're just going to be on this forever, right? But all you're doing is covering up the symptoms forever and never getting to why you're having this acid reflux in the first place. And so, yes, it's a much easier way to just cover up the problem and ignore it. But in reality, maybe is the diet that you're eating. Maybe you're having enzyme deficiencies. Maybe you have a actual hiatal hernia in there that needs to be fixed. And so when you look at these prescription medications, and I would, almost be bold enough to say that most prescription medications should be looked at as a short-term fix to a long-term root cause issue. And so, look, prescription medications are incredible. They've saved many, many, many lives. But just because an antibiotic gets rid of an infection right now doesn't mean you should be taking that antibiotic every day forever. It's the kind of perspective that we need to have on prescription medications is use them temporarily to take care of an acute issue, but as you're taking them, really start looking into the root cause of the problem simultaneously. So eventually there's a world where you're getting off of this, right?
Right. And I think you raise a good point that I want to emphasize is that the medical establishment has done some amazing things, right? So, for example, I wouldn't be here if not for the medical establishment with my brain tumor and curing me of that. And so for these life-threatening circumstances, after something negative has happened, to be able to bring somebody back to a healthy state, it's very good. But when it comes to preventative medicine, to prevent something from going wrong or root cause analysis and so on, that's where Western medicine has not really excelled. And so it
wasn't built for that. It wasn't built for that. It was built from treating infections, treating traumas, things that are going to kill us acutely. And I think we, and I have this conversation a lot because I come from both. I come from Western medicine and also the longevity and health and wellness world now is I think we place too much pressure and emphasis on the Western medical system to keep us healthy when that's really our own personal responsibility. And that's why it's so important to have conversations like this, because part of personal responsibility is learning all the things that you need to learn to maintain health and to be preventative. And part of that is this conversation that we just had about the hallmarks of aging. Like, I think most people should have some interest in understanding what these are and how to positively affect them.
Right, exactly. Right? There was a study once done that looked at the amount of time it takes knowledge transfer to go from a scientific lab into a medical doctor's office. And it was a crazy number. I believe it was around 17 years.
I think even 17 years is a short number because I could tell you that the stuff that I learned in medical school over 30 years ago, they're still teaching with very little updates, And so it's a long time, but 17 years is about right. And a lot of the things that we're discussing here today, the people that are living today won't be able to really benefit from this, and the knowledge is already here if you're relying on the Western medical establishment to bring this to you.
Exactly. And that's the perspective I had when I was starting to think about the concept behind my business was going straight to the scientific lab and finding like that is the absolute cutting edge of the field and seeing what they are discovering and then finding a way to be able to transfer that knowledge and those insights and actual practical therapies, if you will, from that lab directly to the consumer. Because I realized that there's no way that we're going to be able to get the medical establishment to move quickly enough. Now, I will say at the same time that it is encouraging to see how many medical practitioners are now taking it upon themselves to go above and beyond. I mean, you're a case in point example of that, right? There's more and more that are doing that. And I think it's growing momentum. And the rate at which people are able to share information now through podcasts and through the internet just in general, and the fact that doctors, yes, they are human as well, and they are also on these different networks and they're learning as well, I think that that's going to actually reduce that 17 or 30 year time horizon into something shorter, but probably still not short enough.
I'm really, to your point, I'm encouraged by the kind of groundswell of people in my profession, physicians, and also other professions really taking it upon themselves to understand this space, which is why I super appreciate you being on here to provide that knowledge to us. But I do think, in my opinion, that the Western medical system, the disease care system, the trauma care system is incredibly important. It saved your life, it saved my life as well. It needs to be there and it will always be there. But there's a new system developing, one focused on health, wellness, longevity, health span, that I think will run in parallel to this. And people will need to be participating in both of those, right? And so that's what I'm really excited about seeing happening right now in this moment that we're in today. Dr. Mark Hyman always says, people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. So people are taking it upon themselves to learn and to participate and do these N of 1 experiments with supplements, with their lifestyle to see what works for them. I think that's what's really important too, that people are monitoring their biomarkers, using things like wearables. I think we both have Oura rings and Apple Watches on. We're in the same camp here.
Yep.
To see what's positively and negatively affecting them. And it's a really incredible time we're living in.
It really is. What I would say in terms of a concern / a sense of urgency is also trying to make this more accessible and achievable for everyone.
Absolutely.
Because what we see is that, we're well-to-do people in the United States and we care about our health. And so we have the budgets to be able to afford this and the knowledge and the education and the social networks with our friend groups and so on. But what about everyone else? And I feel like there's this bifurcation of the United States and the world in general, where you've got the very healthy that they tend to aggregate in big cities that are a little bit more superficial, like New York and Miami and Los Angeles and so on. And then you have everyone else who's not really paying attention to it and they're not really into it. And those are the people who are suffering the most. Mm-hmm. And so then the question turns to, if that's the case, how do we get them more interested? How do we use human psychology for like incentivization to get people more interested in making a change in their health, a change in their life, and so on? Something that I'm very passionate about. It's something I'm trying to do with NOVOS. We founded it as a public benefit corporation specifically for that reason. We create products that are, we believe, addictive in the sense of their taste, so that when you have a choice of an unhealthy sweet, for example, or a super healthy one, you can choose ours. So it's the small
using the powers of taste for good instead of negative, like the ultra processed food industry.
Exactly. Right? So these are small steps that we're taking. We have a free mobile app called NOVOS Life, which, to your question before about lifestyle, this will give people personalized recommendations for what they can do.
I love that.
It also has a free biological age test that's created by AI. A professor at University of Washington, Dr. Sue-In Lee, along with Dr. Matt Kaberlein, a big name in the longevity research field, co-authored the paper, and we imported their work into the app. And then we also have a chatbot that is trained on longevity data and your personal information. And as a public benefit corporation, we make all of this free for anyone in the world to be able to access.
Wow.
So we could easily charge for it, but we want to do what we can to try to get more and more people interested and aware that most of the things you can do to slow down your aging don't cost you a cent. And when it comes to fasting, you'll even save money because you have less food that you're eating, right? So it is something that can be economically accessible to people. We just need to find a way to do it.
That's incredible work that you're doing. And it's so great that you're putting this out there at no cost for people. I can't wait to download the app. I think, is this the app that you also have the skin age calculator on?
So that's separate, but we're actually integrating it into the app very soon. Okay. So NOVOS Life will soon have face age. Right. So face age is something that you can find on our website. If you go to novoslabs.com/faceage, it's an AI technology that's trained on millions of people's photographs. And we're able to tell you how young or old you look right now. And then we can also tell you skin health markers, for example, pore size, skin inflammation levels, skin wrinkles, eye age, and so on. And then we give you personalized recommendations for what you can do to improve all of these scores. Now, we started the conversation where we talked about how, like, the superficial side, how we look in some ways is not a reflection of what's happening inside. But at the same time, in some ways it actually is. And there was a study done called the Dunedin study that looked at people from, I believe, 5 years old until now. They're, I think, 56 years old now, and over 1,000 people in New Zealand. And it also more recently, about 6 years ago, they ran an epigenetic test on these people. And they created an epigenetic test called the Dunedin pace clock, right? To measure the speed at which you're aging at this point in time, based more or less on the last 6 months of your life, but also aspects of even your childhood might impact your pace of aging. And they were then able to categorize people into the slowest agers, average agers, and the fastest agers. Then they used computer software to merge the faces of the 10 slowest agers, 10 average agers, and the 10 fastest agers for both males and females. And when you look at the photographs of these people, actually, I'm going to correct myself, they're 46 years old. And so this was done at, I believe, when they were 40 years old or 45 years old. When you look at the photographs, you see the slowest aging people look like they're in their late 30s. And the fastest aging people look like they're probably 57, 58 years old. So it's almost a 20-year gap in the perceived age of these people. So what's happening inside of us is actually impacting our skin aging, the adipose tissue, so the fat on our face and how young we look, our skeletal structure, and so on, our hairline. All of these things are being impacted by the rate at which you're aging. And so all of the things we've been talking about, these lifestyle changes, even certain supplements, they can all have a favorable effect on that. So those who are a little bit more superficially inclined can also get the added benefit that they have a lower risk of disease and mortality as they're aging when they're focusing on longevity, but they can also look better in the process too.
It's so true. You know, it just recently brought up a memory for me. A couple of years ago, I went to a medical school reunion, and I looked at all the people that went to medical school with me. And there was about a 20-year gap in the ones that look the youngest versus the ones that look the oldest. And you can really, and we're all the same age going through medical school at the same time. And so it's really poignant to see how people age from an outwardly standpoint by looking in the mirror can differentiate so much as you kind of go through life, you know?
Yeah. Did the critical care and ER doctors look the oldest and the plastic surgeons look the youngest?
I would say that you could definitely see the impacts of stress and your professional stress, how much it impacts the way you look. It's a huge factor, I think. Absolutely. And, you know, stress impacts a lot of aspects of our life. I think if you have a stress life, and I was a victim of this, you don't exercise as much. You don't move around as much. You don't eat well. You just kind of eat whatever's around, which is usually ultra-processed garbage. You don't sleep well when you're stressed. And all those things kind of come together to cause aging, right?
Not only that. So I think it was as recent as around 2010 or so, maybe just before it, the medical establishment didn't accept the idea that stress could cause health issues. And it took some time to do studies and find like the glucocorticoid receptor stimulation and essentially increases in cortisol and the effects that high chronic cortisol can have on organ function and blood pressure and heart attack risk. And even more recently finding that like hair graying is not only caused by stress, but stress can actually cause your hair to turn gray. And when you remove that stressor, the melanin returns and the hair goes back to the proper color. Now, there could be other reasons too. Aging does cause it. Nutrient deficiencies, especially copper and zinc and so on, can cause it. It's not the only cause, but the stress is having a direct impact on our physiology.
Absolutely. You know, my previous life, I used to do hair transplant surgery, and almost every single person that I talked to that had lost their hair, there was a stressful period of their life that they can point to that led to that hair loss. They can say, I started losing hair when I started this new job, or I started graying and losing hair when I had my child, those kind of things. And so it's not an old wives' tale where your mom might have told you you gave them gray hair. It's real. The stress does cause real changes in the hair color and the amount of hair that you have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was once thought of as that, and as only after research has now proved it, it's shown. Yeah, there's a lot of truth in the things our parents have taught us.
Absolutely. So going back to the aging clock, because I know you have a lot of specific deep knowledge here. I remember getting from Elizabeth Blackburn actually my first telomere age score done
Okay.
almost like 2 decades ago now, I think. Wow, it was a long time ago. And I was really happy with the results. And then
Okay.
I was a little bit bummed when I found out that telomere age really is not a real indicator of true biological age. And so I started going down the rabbit hole of biological age tests, and I took the Horvath test when it first came out. What is the current status of biological age testing, and what is your perception around how the accuracy of it, and what do you use it for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel your pain, first of all. My telomere length was that of an 8-year-old. And how much I would love to have the biology, not the
Right.
brain, not the mind, but the biology of an 8-year-old.
Right.
But I don't. Believe me, I don't. But with that said, so people are going to hear people throwing around carelessly this concept known as biological age.
Right.
You hear it
Mhm.
everywhere now. And oftentimes it's not actually based on anything with strong scientific backing. So someone might say, oh, my biological age is 10 years younger. And I ask, well, what's that based on? Usually they don't know. But when we dig into it, it's like, oh, based on my resting heart rate.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, that's not actually your biological age, right? So it might be, or your HRV, or like these individual data points that companies are trying very hard to associate with longevity, but it's not actually true longevity measures. So when it comes to biological age
On that
clocks,
point, to your point, I'm
Yep.
so sorry. One of the scales that I had a while ago would give me a biological age every time I stepped on it. And I was like, how is this thing giving me a biological age,
Absolutely.
through an electrical current going through my body? There's just no way.
absolutely.
And so people do need to be very knowledgeable about where is that being calculated from before they put a lot of stock in it, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's give the high level overview
Sure.
of how biological age can be best measured. Actually, what it is in the first place. So
Yes.
biological age is essentially how old we are biologically, which is at least now being calculated as um, the risk of morbidity, mortality, and also like how high your quality of life is. And it's going to be based on the average of people of a certain chronological age. So me being 40, if I am biologically 30, that means my risk of getting a disease or dying, and also like my quality of life, so my cognition and physical abilities and so on, should be that of an average 30-year-old.
Mhm.
And so that is great because every 7 to 8 years, your risk of death doubles. And that's an exponential curve. And that's why so few people are left when you hit 90,
Right.
right?
That's an important point to double click on, because as you age, if your biological age is older than your
Yes.
chronological age, it's actually a much higher risk of death as you go through this aging process. So tracking your biological age becomes even more important as you age. And so I'm 52 now right now. I get my biological age test done every 6 months to a year because I just want to know,
Yeah.
because I know how important it is now to track it.
And the
Yeah.
fact that 80% approximately is your lifestyle and
Right.
your environment, so you can
Right.
control it, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's a great point. So being 40, if my biological age was 47 versus it being, say, 33, that would mean 4 times higher risk of death or disease at this point in time than
Right.
it would be if it was lower.
Mhm.
And so that should instill a sense of urgency, light a fire underneath you to like change your
Exactly.
lifestyle to
Mhm.
try to get it lower. So how are biological ages measured, at least in the more effective way? Well, we'll talk about very quickly this idea of the omics sciences, right? So we talked a little bit about this already. We have our genomics. So those are our genes.
Mhm.
Then we have our epigenomics. That's our epigenome. From there, you have your transcriptomics. This is creating messenger RNA from your genes, and based on what's exposed from your epigenome, which lights are
Mhm.
turned on, let's say. And that's then going to lead to protein creation, which is your proteome. Proteins are what all of these messages are communicating across our bodies, the enzymes that are catalyzing reactions, so on and so forth. Proteins are essentially what any drug or supplement is really modulating. It's the proteins in our bodies, right? Like altering the shape of that protein or what it docks to and so on.
Mhm.
So proteins are incredibly important. Then you have something known as your metabolome.
Mm-hmm.
Metabolome are all of the molecules in our blood, right? It can include the microplastics. It includes everything, right? The cholesterol, the lipids. And then from there, you also have your microbiome. And so all of these are being investigated for ways to try to measure biological age and disease risk and mortality risk and so on. With that said, currently, the most advanced form of biological age measuring is the epigenome. And within the epigenome, you have some clocks, they're called biological age clocks, that are more effective than others. So you mentioned the Horvath clock. The Horvath clock was the first biological age clock, but it was tracking chronological age. It was trained based on chronological age, as opposed to being trained on morbidity and mortality and quality of life and so on. So it was an amazing accomplishment to create this clock in the first place. But in terms of practical use today, it's really best for, say, a crime scene. Like there's a murder mystery and you're trying to figure out how old the culprit potentially was, right? And so you use this Horvath clock to approximate how old they were chronologically. But for practical and medical reasons, it's not nearly as powerful. And so second generation clocks came out, and these were trained on morbidity and mortality. And these are clocks like the Pheno age clock, the Grimm age clock, and so on. And these were a major upgrade. Then there were third generation clocks that came out, or really just one. And this is the Dunedin pace clock that I mentioned earlier. The Dunedin pace clock actually gives a different measure. It is your rate of aging at this point in time. Lower is better. So 1 means you're aging at the average rate for someone at any given point in time. For 0.69, which is my biological rate of aging, that means I'm aging 31% slower than the average person. So each year, I'm aging only 0.69 years, potentially. At least that's what this clock is approximating. That also means a lower risk of morbidity, mortality, et cetera. It's a really powerful measurement because it's essentially looking at your trajectory of aging. Like based on predominantly the last 6 months of my life and my lifestyle, is this causing me to age faster than I was before or slower than I was before? Whereas...
I was going to, sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to say, this is where I find these aging clocks the most useful. It's a scorecard of all of the things you've done in the last 6 months. And so that's why I measure mine every 6 months. And it creates a sense of urgency. It creates a sense of investigation into your habits, into your lifestyle, into new interventions you might have put into place over the last 6 months to see what is a sum total of what you've done. If your pace of aging goes down, you did something right. You need to keep doing that, whatever you did in the last 6 months. But if it goes up, really it's time to turn your attention to your health again and your overall habits. And so I think it's so important and critical to highlight this as more of a scorecard rather than anything that you should look at as being a scorecard for yourself rather than anything you should look at as a kind of like a detrimental thing that your pace of aging is so high and now you're just a bad human being. You know, it's really, and to that point, I think it's also very important to do these on a consistent schedule, right? And so if you can afford to do these every 6 months, I think it's a good pace of doing these.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree. I look at it as a North Star metric.
Right,
it's one single metric that tells you if overall the aggregate of everything you've been doing is actually good for you and it's leading to a better potential health outcome, or if it's not so good for you. And when we get typical blood labs completed, we're always looking to see if something is in range, but we actually don't know what is fully optimal. And there's so many different blood biomarkers that like nobody, even the best doctor, doesn't know exactly what the combination of all of these factors together actually equates to. This is something that requires mathematics and AI to really try to figure out what all of this means. And that's where these clocks come in. Now, those blood labs are still very important, but that's more for specific condition, or, someone has cardiovascular issues. So you need to look at their ApoB and their LDL and LP(a) and so on, right? So
and they're more like lagging indicators too. Like once those start getting abnormal, it means you're accumulating damage for a long period of time, right? And so this is more temporally significant by something over the last 6 months versus years of damage now leading to metabolic disease, heart disease, etc.
Yes. I couldn't say it better myself.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm really excited about these aging clocks because, and you provide an aging clock as well, and you were saying you do this in partnership with True Diagnostic Laboratories. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we're partnered with them, but we offer a different customer experience.
Okay.
I would say True excels with working with doctors directly. We excel working with consumers and making very consumer-friendly products. And the price point is also more affordable, what we offer. So we've got, for example, the pace of aging. So we can tell you how fast or slow you're aging. We have the Symphony Age clock integrated, which would be the newest clock coming out of Yale University that will tell you your biological age. But even more interesting, I think, is organ-specific ages. And because, overall, as a whole body, I might be in my late 20s biologically. That's what many tests have come out to for me. But what about my liver or my heart? Or maybe there's a specific organ that's lagging the others, and that one I should focus more on. And then we also offer a fourth output, which is the telomere length I mentioned earlier. So we get all 4 of those in the NOVOS Age kit.
That's fantastic because those are the 4 that I look at with all my patients, actually. I think these are all 4 incredible metrics to be able to track on a frequent basis, especially when you've got the basics in order, right? Like I feel it's probably overkill to start doing this if you're eating ultra processed food every day and you're, maybe in metabolic disease, many pounds in the obese category, maybe you're not sleeping at all. What I try to recommend to our patients that come is let's clean up all of that first, right? And then we're going to start doing a deeper dive into things like biological age and even utilizing supplements that can affect biological age, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it is great to see the baseline, at least for motivation. If someone is very unhealthy and seeing that they're aging like 1.2, 20% faster than the average person.
And that's a good point. It does. It's good to see where you're at the first moment of going through a health journey, because it's also very motivating when you put things in place, because guaranteed this will come down a lot by doing the basics right.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You can go a very long way with your biological aging, just getting those basics, like reducing your body weight, eating healthier diets, sleeping better, being more physically active. Yeah. You can go theoretically from 1.2 to 0.9 in a year's time, which is a tremendous change.
Absolutely. So I do want to now talk about also, like, say you're at 0.9, you want to get to 0.7, right? You're doing all the things, but what are some of the compounds that can potentially push you over the edge of even getting slower biological aging? And, when I think about this, I also think about our conversation about science then becoming mainstream, and it takes a long time. And a really good example of that is the interventions testing program run by the NIH, right? And so for those of you who don't know, the intervention testing program is an NIH program where they're actually testing different interventions on specific population of mice in 2 different laboratories. Is that correct?
3
different laboratories.
yes.
Amazing. And I mean, as far as validated mouse studies goes, this is one of the best, right?
Yes.
And maybe you can talk about the program, some of the interventions, and what your thoughts are around them.
Yeah, sure. So, I think you summarized it nicely. Yeah. So they're doing it in multiple places. They're doing it at the same time. And that's important just to, scientists oftentimes say, we need to replicate the study to confirm that it actually is having this effect. And so the fact that in this case, a substance succeeds if it is replicated 3 times is a very, very high scientific standard.
Exactly.
And so I will caution to say that simply because it doesn't succeed doesn't mean that it isn't actually having a favorable effect. It really depends on, you have to then dig into the study. Like, did it fail in all 3 studies? Okay, well, then that's an issue. Did it succeed in 1 or 2? Well, why might it have succeeded in 1 or 2? Or why did it fail in only 1 or 2, right? So then that's when you have to start investigating and trying to better understand, right? So it's not always clean cut. But with that said, some substances that have been found to have a favorable effect are, for example, rapamycin, which we mentioned earlier. Rapamycin is a immunomodulatory drug, so it's something that is intended to turn off your immune system in the case of an organ transplant. But it's also been found, largely because of, it's believed, the reduction in mTOR stimulation that we discussed earlier, to extend lifespan and health span in practically every single animal species ever studied. And there are a lot of human biohackers and even scientists in the field that off the record and some on the record take rapamycin, right? So they'll take a large dose, say 5 milligrams is the typical dose, like once every week or once every other week. And there are potential side effects and there's a lot of risks. And you as a medical doctor can say it better than I can, but it's not something I would suggest that people just do on their own, have medical supervision.
Well, they can't. They have to. It's a prescription medication, right? And so I know there are some online vendors selling it without a prescription, but you have to be very suspect of that because it is a prescription medication. It is. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's a very promising compound. Scientists typically compare results of other interventions to the rapamycin to see where it falls relative to rapamycin. So that's kind of like the gold standard, if you will, in the longevity field currently for something ingestible to extend health span and lifespan.
What are some of the others?
So one that's actually commonly taken, and most people don't even know that it has this effect when they're taking it, is astaxanthin. So astaxanthin is an over-the-counter supplement. It's something that causes shrimp to be pink and salmon to be pink. Oftentimes, it's actually even added as a food additive to make farmed salmon artificially look more pink than it actually is. Ironically, this is like one case where it could actually be health promoting, right? It's not like a negative chemical.
Ironic, right?
It's a positive chemical this time.
Most food colorings are very bad for you.
Yep. I'm sure they were not thinking that, like, oh, let's use a healthy compound, but it just so happens to be a very healthy compound. I believe it's a carotenoid family. It oftentimes finds itself in your skin tissue, for example. It's been studied for things like improvements in athletic performance, but also improvements in skin health. Potentially, I can't make this claim like officially, but a lot of anecdotes, people say that from sun exposure, it can reduce the damage and reduce the risk of getting a sunburn and more likely to tan as a result of it. And again, the carotenoids are these antioxidants that sit in your skin and they're protective. So, but it's also been shown in the ITP to extend lifespan in the mice. So that's a very accessible compound. 17 beta, is it 17 beta or 17 alpha? 17 beta estradiol.
Yeah. I forgot to, so we'll look it up and put it in the show notes. But I'm pretty sure it is beta.
I know the Greek character, but I think that's beta. So 17 beta estradiol. It's a hormone. It's a feminine hormone, being in the estrogen family, but it's actually not a feminizing hormone, so to speak. That's also been shown to extend lifespan. I'm very proud that the mouse study that we ran on one of our products actually outperformed that, as well as the dastatinib that I mentioned, and every other supplement ever studied, we have outperformed in terms of extending aged mouse lifespan. So including nicotinamide riboside, NR, which is very popular.
Right.
So both every supplement as well as many of these most advanced interventions that are being done in the scientific laboratory, many of them, even TERT genetic therapy, we outperformed. So
so I mean, I'd love to dive a little bit more into the substances that you've found that move the needle and have outperformed even some of the interventions in ITP. Can you talk about some of those a little bit?
Yeah. So I'll talk about the individual ingredients.
Yeah.
But what I'll also emphasize is what's perhaps even more important is the effect that the combinations of ingredients can have. Professor Brian Kennedy at National University of Singapore, he's a world-renowned longevity researcher. He has spoken about many times at different events about how in his research he finds that when you take one healthy longevity ingredient and you add another healthy longevity ingredient, you would think they would be additive. More often than not, they actually exhibit the same effect or actually even a worse effect. And in a few cases, it actually has a negative effect on the lifespan or health span of the animal. So it's not as simple as like A plus B equals C, and that is going to be a greater outcome.
And this is a huge problem I see a lot because I have a lot of patients that find supplements that promote longevity and they buy all these they have a huge supplement cabinet of longevity supplements. And the fact is that a lot of these, when given simultaneously, can, like you said, either counteract each other or actually cause a negative effect. And testing them together, it's incredibly important on your own biological age, but also in the laboratory before you start combining random ingredients.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just overall, it's an overly simplistic comprehension of
Exactly.
biology. There's actually a very well-known longevity influencer that is very popular. I won't say by name, but one of the things that he does is restrict caloric intake. So he's hypocaloric, has a low calorie intake, but then also takes hormone therapies like TRT, and I believe at some point HGH. And so that's testosterone replacement therapy and human growth hormone. And we believe that is an overly simplistic perception of aging, because one of the reasons why caloric restriction probably extends health span and lifespan, among many, is that you are actually reducing these growth hormones, androgynous hormones, right? And so if you're then replacing them with injections, you're probably counteracting the benefits of that fasting in the first place. So it's erroneous to think that because one thing works, that you should then add that to your routine without understanding the biological mechanisms by which it is working in the first place, right? So that also applies to stacking supplements. And I'd say for basic general multivitamin types of ingredients, as long as you're getting the dosages right and so on, you can stack those. Like, we know that these are essential. But when you're getting more complex with things like longevity, like, are you overstimulating hormesis, which then it becomes toxic? Are you overstimulating AMP kinase or not stimulating mTOR enough? And then the different mechanisms of aging. I mean, it's incredibly complex. And
exactly. In fact, and also to your point, what time of day do you take these as well, right? Because if you're doing exercise and then you're taking certain supplements, it's completely counteracting each other. You're blunting the effect of the exercise and you're blunting the effect of the compounds that you're taking.
Right.
So you have to be able to time these correctly. And just to double click on the point of, doing multiple interventions at the same time, you're affecting these pathways in completely opposite directions. And so you're pulling the pathway in one direction and pushing it in another direction at the same time. And this further emphasizes why people need to understand some of these pathways like mTOR, because certain interventions can push it or pull it, and you have to at least temporarily or time-wise separate those interventions. So I just wanted to make further emphasis on this point because it's very important.
yes, and I don't want people to feel discouraged at the
Right.
same time. So what can they do? I think number one is to refer to experts in the field that understand the full span of longevity research. And we try to do it at NOVOS, and we try to put that information out there in blog posts and in our mobile app and so on. And even in our formulations, we work very hard on those formulations. But we're not the only ones out there. And of course, Next Health and you and what you've created here as well. But I'd say the second thing is data, right? So get the biological age test done, or get the blood labs done. See how these different interventions are affecting you with objective data and then subjective data. Like, are you feeling better? Are you feeling more energized? Are you sleeping better? All of these things that are associated with health span. Now, not everything that, as I said before, that's good for you in the short term is going to be good for you in the long term. But generally speaking, if you're sleeping better and more soundly, if you don't feel as agitated and stressed and anxious and so on, these things are associated with a healthier life. So on the subjective level, that's probably also something that more likely than not is moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. So what are some of the compounds you found and you put into your product that you feel are the most beneficial?
Sure. So I'll start with the most controversial one.
Uh-huh.
The most controversial one is a trace dose of lithium. So lithium, people, when they hear it, they either think of exploding batteries on airplanes, or they think of like psychiatric drug, for bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. But in that case, the dosage is 200, 300 times greater than we're talking about. We're at the 1 milligram dosage level. So San Pellegrino water brand, for example, if you have a couple of liters of that, you're actually getting in the neighborhood of around 1 milligram. It's high in lithium. Lithium is actually something that we evolved with. It's in our water supply, right? So it's an element, it's in rocks, and it leaches through into the water.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's been in our water supply since caveman days. So.
Exactly. We've always been drinking it. The salmon we eat the lithium is in their tissue. And now with farm-raised salmon and municipal water supply and bottled waters and so on, we're getting very, very low levels of it. studies have been done looking at populations that have higher levels of lithium in their water supply. And there are correlations with, for example, lower rates of depression, suicide, murder, bipolar, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, dementia, all of these neurocognitive related issues, lower rates. Some scientists have even gone as far as saying that it should be considered a vitamin or a mineral, an essential mineral, to integrate into the water supply to get people drinking more of it again. It has favorable effects on the epigenome, which we talked about earlier. It has, again, these cognitive benefits. So we included that in our formula at the 1 milligram level. So
Great.
very small, but high enough level to be associated with these positive effects.
Great. What are the next couple that you have incorporated that you believe in?
Yeah, let's talk about pterostilbene. This is also not controversial, but it brings up a controversy, which is resveratrol. Right. So resveratrol is an ingredient that Dr. David Sinclair, who we mentioned earlier for the Yamanaka factors at Harvard, he wrote the book Lifespan, the New York Times bestseller. He has popularized resveratrol, but a lot of people are critical of that. And they don't think that resveratrol does quite what it has been worked up to be. Specifically, there haven't really been replicated studies to show lifespan extending effects of resveratrol. Also, the dosage is incredibly high. And then in the mice that have been studied, where there was an effect from Dr. Sinclair's lab, it was in obese mice. So it wasn't a normal, healthy mouse. And pterostilbene, on the other hand, so resveratrol comes from grapes and it's in red wine. That's part of the reason it's famous. Pterostilbene is found in blueberries. And it's a very similar molecule. It just has 3 methyl groups attached. So it actually has a better oral bioavailability. So when you ingest it, you absorb a lot more of it. And it has a much longer half-life in the blood. So it sticks around in our blood and it can exhibit its effects even longer. And scientific studies have fantastic results from it. In fact, David Sinclair's former lab supervisor, Dr. Leonard Garanti at MIT, suggests pterostilbene over resveratrol. So that's another ingredient that we have in our formula. Calcium alpha-ketoglutarate is a very powerful ingredient. Alpha-ketoglutarate is something that's in our bodies. Part of the Krebs cycle. Levels decline as we age. And the calcium form specifically was found at Brian Kennedy's lab in Singapore to have a favorable effect on mouse lifespan as well as on epigenetic age. So not other forms. There's like arginine alpha-ketoglutarate, which bodybuilders oftentimes take, but the calcium form specifically. We don't know exactly why, but presumably, or a hypothesis, is that it's something to do with the rate of absorption. Slows down the absorption, which turns out to actually be a good thing in this case. And so it extended mouse lifespan, but it also, in humans, was associated with a lower biological age as measured by the epigenome. So that's something that we have a hefty dose of 1,100 milligrams in one packet of our flagship product, NOVOS Core. Fisetin. Fisetin is found in strawberries. And it was looked at as being a senolytic. So something that would destroy the senescent cells that we mentioned earlier. Well, recent research has found that it actually doesn't exhibit that effect. But we're very happy with its inclusion because we've done a couple of studies actually at different labs which have found really great benefits of our combined formula, largely because fisetin is in it, but the effects of all of the other ingredients combined. So this is the synergy. So I'll give you 2 examples. One is on the senescence side of things. So at Newcastle University, they looked at human senescent cells. I believe it was in keratinocytes. So these are skin cells, and looked at the effects that our product, NOVOS Core, could have on those senescent cells. And we were able to reduce the size of those senescent cells by approximately 50%, which was at the same order of magnitude, approximately, as the prescription drug rapamycin. The second study was done at at the Salk Institute here in California. Dr. Pamela Maher, who advises us, she ran a study with a prescription R&D drug. It's not yet out for the public. It's still being studied, that specifically targets this process known as oxytosis ferroptosis. And it's an inflammatory process. It's associated with Alzheimer's, dementia, as well as certain types of cancer, and compared the fisetin to that drug, and then also compared our combined formula to that drug. And fisetin performed well, but our combined formula performed 50% as well, 50% in between the fisetin and that prescription drug. So significantly more powerful by combining the ingredients. And the other ingredients are not known as senolytic.
Right.
And so it's this combination, the combinatorial effects that we are seeing having this really great effect in the in vitro studies, as well as the in vivo mouse study that we did, and even a human case study where we showed 3/4 of the people that took our product for 6 months reduced their pace of aging by the equivalent of 1 month per year. So imagine like 1 free month of life per year is how we like to think of it.
Right.
And then the quarter that did not slow down, they also didn't speed up. So you would expect in this group, there would have been some people whose pace of aging should have sped up, like lifestyle stressors, not living as healthy as they were, and so on, but they didn't. So that leaves us hopeful that the effects of our formula are actually protecting those people, and those who are maintaining their healthy lifestyles are actually slowing down their pace. That's a case study, and we have a clinical trial that's underway right now.
So exciting. Yeah. Well, I'm personally so excited for all the research that you're doing and to see what you come up with next. You're doing incredible work, and I really appreciate all of your knowledge for our listeners and to come on our show. It's really important for people to know this information, and I know we kind of got a lot of very sciencey at some points. However, I think this is important science because it can really affect our health, and it's accessible for people, even for free through things like your app. So it's really important stuff, and I thank you for doing this with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here. For anyone who's interested in learning more, there's novoslabs.com. We're on social as Novos Labs. Then I have a blog, slowmyage.com, where I post my results, my lifestyle, and just my perspective on the field in general. And I'm also on social media, especially Instagram and X, as Slow My Age.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from the Slow My Age blog, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
What are you most excited about coming up?
Oh, wow. We have a lot of great things happening within our company. So we were just recently accepted into the Longevity Biotech Association. It's run by Dr. Nir Barzilai. He's a prominent researcher in the field at Albert Einstein. And we're the only direct-to-consumer, we're the only over-the-counter formula company in that group. Everything else is this advanced biotech. And the reason we're inducted into it is because of, number one, the meticulous science that we follow, working with the best scientists in the world to validate our products and to help us formulate. And then to that point, our future formulations and the things we're doing are true biotech, like experimenting with many different compounds and combinations in all different animal species to figure out what is probably going to be the most effective in humans, and then bringing that research to humans to then validate it. So we're taking that biotech approach, but applying it to a consumer company that's venture capital funded. It's new. It's not done this way. It has not been done this way before, but we're really excited about the potential because there's a lot to learn from biotech. There's also a lot to learn from going direct to consumer and enabling people in the short term rather than having to wait in the long term. And we're using natural ingredients, safe ingredients in the process.
Yeah. I mean, if the entire supplement industry started off that way, we'd be in a much different situation than we are now with the kind of wild, wild west of supplements everyone refers it to, which you have no idea what these products are doing or if they even have the right ingredients in the bottle that you're taking. That's what's so scary, that you can buy a bottle of supplements now and you don't even know what's really inside of there.
Oh my God. Yes. You remind me very quickly. I went to Erewhon yesterday here in LA because we sell our product there. And I was just checking the store shelves and there is a drink that's sold as an energy drink. And it has caffeine in it, but it has a high dose of something called L-Dopa. And as a doctor, you know what L-Dopa is. And it was used in studies for people with Alzheimer's and so on. But it's basically something that will immediately raise your dopamine levels. But there's really no safeguard on it. And you can, when you stop taking it, your dopamine receptor sites can be significantly downregulated, and then you can lose the effects of dopamine, right? And so you don't want to take this chronically. Like I had tried it once or twice as a supplement, and I was like, wow, I feel great, but I don't want to take any chances. It's sold on the store shelf.
Yeah, anyone can buy it and have no idea. No one's going to look at the ingredients and see L-Dopa and understand what it truly does to your receptors and the downregulation of them over the long term. And then you need bigger and bigger dopamine hits to get to the same effect, et cetera. And so, yeah, it's it's buyer beware all the time, right?
Yes.
But anyway, Chris, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait to have you on again.
Thank you. It was fantastic to be here. Great questions. It was really enjoyable.